I am Patrick Yoes, National President of Fraternal Order of Police. This is the Blue View. Thank you for joining us on the Blue View podcast. I first, before we even get started, let me tell you how much I appreciate the work that you've done working with us, especially this last Congress. And we've had some successes this last Congress, but even going back your entire time in the Congress, you've always been a strong advocate for law enforcement. I want you to know how much we really appreciate that.
Well, Chief Yoes, this is what I like to do.
Yeah. Well,
and I learned it from being a mayor.
yeah.
Mayor Patterson, which is the third largest city in New Jersey. And in Patterson, with one T, in Patterson, I was always close to the police and fire departments.
Yeah.
And I felt that if you want a strong city, you have to make your two most important departments stronger than ever.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you're not working on it, there's something wrong. Because you can't say we're done, we're finished, because we're never done.
Yeah.
And to protect the resources of our city. And so people have to be educated about what cops and firefighters do. They think they know what they do, but you got to go out. You got to go out in the field to see what the heck happens. When I became a congressman, 2 years later, Congresswoman, I don't know if you remember McCarthy, her husband was killed was shot in a subway in Patterson, New Jersey, and her son had a bullet lodged in his head. And that's how I met her. Before I was a congressman, I went to the hospital. I didn't know these people. Just to see them. And we're grappling with the problems as much now as we were 25 years ago.
Well, we appreciate that. The cornerstone of every community is safety. And if people don't feel safe, all of these other things really take a back seat to it. So I appreciate you, your support of our profession over the years. Let's back up a little bit, and I got our viewers and listeners. Tell them a little bit about yourself, please.
Well, I'm 86 years old and proud of it. I've got a lot of energy, perhaps too much. Ask my wife. And I've always been close to police officers, not as a club, but as the serious nature of their business, that if I'm a public official and I'm just waiting for crisis, that's not the way to do this at all. We got to avoid crisis. In order to do that, we got to do something. We got to do things about benefits. We got to do things about protection, about having police out there who have the resources themselves. I mean, look how long it took us to pass the legislation just to use automatic data in order to trace guns.
Yeah.
When I learned this, I read this wrong. Can't be. Cannot be. Because if we're going to do, like we say we're going to do, we're going to protect police officers out there in the field, how in God's name did we succumb to that? Yeah. And that had bipartisan support. Yeah. And it sounds a little logical. Yeah. I think that this is important. We not put this on the automatic thing, and not realizing, of course, that we're going to protect criminals for the most part. Yeah. And we're not going to find out who owned the gun in the first place. So, all that looks the same as not. It's something I have to attend to. I've lived all my life in Patterson, New Jersey. I went to school there. I went to St. John's Grammar High School and St. George's Grammar School. So I went to my schools in the lower grades in Patterson. Then I went to Fordham University. I wanted to be a baseball player. And my mother and father didn't like the idea, Chief Yoes. They thought that this was going to be a path to nowhere. Yeah. And the more they said it, the harder I tried to be a ball player. I had a couple of tryouts with the Phillies. And I thought I was going places. One of my semi-pro coaches told my father, he can make the majors, no question. He says, but he don't have enough time for practice. He's more interested in school. And I said to myself, that doesn't sound too bad. Being interested in school. Fordham was, they bailed me out in terms of what I thought I could do. Yeah. And it was a great university, and I'm still attached to it. Went to graduate school there as well because my father wanted me to be a lawyer. My mother wanted me to be a lawyer. I was going to be the neighborhood lawyer. There were no lawyers in my neighborhood in South Patterson. And I said to my father, broke his heart about a month and a half before law school was to start. I said, Dad, I don't want to be a lawyer. And my father got up and he said, you know, are you crazy? He said, what do you want to do? My father worked for the railroad. He had an office job. He cleaned the office. He used to bust his brother's chops because they were in the railroad, and they were all shovel guys. They worked their rear ends off. And my father had this office job, cleaning the office.
Well, I will tell you, I've worked the railroad, and I've shoveled those rocks, and they don't move very well. That's a very difficult job. So well played.
I know.
Yeah.
And I had to promise my father that I would never go for a job at the railroads later on in life. I had to promise him because he did not want me to be a railroad guy because they didn't treat their employees that well, as good as he thought they should be, and he was right. But he worked also on the wharf. After he finished his day job, he went and worked on the piers, and he'd come home late to eat at supper. And I appreciated these things. I was very close to my dad. So to tell him that I wasn't going to law school was not easy. And the second thing I had to tell him was, well, what are you going to go get your master's in? I said, well, I decided to do this, Dad. Maybe you better sit down when I tell you. So he was seated. I says, I am going to go and get my master's degree. He said, yeah. And he looked at me, didn't move his head, in what? I said, well, I'm going to get my master's degree in philosophy. He stood up from the Italian porcelain kitchen table. He stood up and he said, what the hell did I raise? It was the best move I ever made. Yeah. I did it in 3 years. I got my master's in a couple of languages, and it taught me a lot more about discipline. I was a street guy from Paterson, New Jersey. And so from Paterson, New Jersey, I went to the Bronx, New York at Fordham University, and I viewed life in an entirely different way. I didn't do that well in undergraduate school. You know, I had some fun, played sports. But I certainly worked my tail off in graduate school. Yeah. And it was very successful. And what to teach, on to teach. And at that time, I started teaching at about $5,200. And I went into the service, fulfilled my responsibilities. And from the service, active duty, I went into the Army Reserve. And I met a lot of good people, a lot of great people. And I was almost involved in the Bay of Pigs thing, which didn't happen, so we were ready to go. Yeah. And I was a teacher for 12 years, and then after that, I went to work for government. Probably my first big mistake, but, you know, I enjoyed it. I worked for the government of Paterson. They treated me well. I was director of policy and planning, and after I got my master's, and I was out of the service, and I liked working in government. I liked it. Service, get help for people.
That's great.
And I've been in government since I was the mayor of Paterson. I served for 7 years because then I left and ran for Congress. And I was a state legislator, got even closer to police officers. And I'm very lucky. I got a beautiful wife. I got a beautiful family. They tolerate me. The shenanigans of politicians, you know, not away from your home. And I don't have to tell you about that yourself. You're president of a great organization, and duty calls. Yeah. And you could say, well, my family's more important, which it is.
No doubt.
But the point of the matter is that you also have an obligation to the men and women you serve. It's not easy.
Yeah.
It was not easy for me.
Yeah, well, you obviously have a servant heart. Thank you for your military service, and I appreciate again all of your support for law enforcement. Your journey has given you a great perspective, and we certainly do appreciate the support that you've given. I'd like to talk a little bit about last Congress. Now, you were a big help last Congress on a number of our issues: the Protect America's First Responders Act, the TBI and PTSD Law Enforcement Training Act, and other law enforcement acts. We were able to get some things passed last year with your help. Can you talk a little bit about those and the journey and what it's going to do for law enforcement?
I think a good example, Mr. President, was the TBI bill, because I started the organization along with a congressman at the time from Pennsylvania, Greenwood. He was a Republican, I was the Democrat. I read a lot about it because I didn't know much about it. I read as much as I could, and I know I wasn't going to become a doctor, but I read as much as I could about traumatic brain injury. Yeah. At that time, the United States government didn't put too much money into traumatic brain injury. And I went to Jack Murtha, who had been in the Congress for many, many moons, was a Marine, 34 years. He talked to me about a pathway of how you're going to help the soldiers out there in the field, because they had never fought a war where there was going to be mines all over the place and explosives all over the place. And there wasn't too much you could do about somebody who was really hit with an explosive in the field. Traumatic brain injury, post-traumatic stress disorder. I went to work right on it, Dr. Greenwood did, and we organized people from all over the country. And local folks who I knew, from Clifton, right next to Patterson, their son had a bad experience, fell off a bike, and that was the rest of his life.
Yeah. And
I learned as much about it, introduced legislation. We put a task force together. We had a symposium every year. It's coming up next week, rather. And it was fascinating. So we were into CTE before the National Football League. We were into concussions. And the war is going on in Iraq and Afghanistan. And what we tried to do is kind of make sure that we're going to certify what we're doing here. And we did it. We passed legislation. We raised a lot of money where there was no money really categorized in terms of brain injury. And we've been doing that every year. We went from a zero budget to now millions and millions of dollars of research and actual help comes out of the defense budget. And we know how many people were injured in the Iraq and Afghan wars. Yeah. And I went to the hospitals. I wanted to see. Seeing is the best learning rather than reading. That's second. I wanted to see for myself. And we did. We helped a lot of people. A lot of people. And we didn't help a lot of people.
Yeah, that's it.
And
it's an unfortunate side. Yeah, just so much need.
But we're still working on it, which is proof of the legislation we passed. We talk about it for the services, and we talk about it in athletics. But what about first responders? Right. Where do they fit in here?
Exactly.
They're putting their lives on the line every day, and a major cause is traumatic brain injury, TBI. So we passed that legislation, made money available, and testing is available. And we're still working on that. We want to improve it as best as we can.
Well, we appreciate your efforts with that. And PTSD, and law enforcement is a lot like military. They're exposed to things that most people in average, just in other professions never have to deal with. Law enforcement officers, I'll give you, just to put it in perspective, an average person might have a couple, 2, 3 traumatic events in their lifetime, and we know a traumatic event can change somebody both physically and mentally.
Absolutely.
But a law enforcement officer may have that in a week.
That's right.
And in the course of their career, some studies show they could have as much as 100 to 180 in the course of their career. Somehow we think that law enforcement officers, somehow it doesn't affect them. Like you sniff our badge and somehow the pain and all of these strategies go away.
You're expected for this to happen.
Yeah.
Isn't that nice?
Yeah, well, I can tell you
How about it happening to you?
Yeah, I can tell you that when someone's broken in the service of others, it's our moral and fiduciary responsibility to fix it. So I appreciate your efforts in recognizing PTSD and helping get us over the finish line, at least in discussions of starting a good start on how we address PTSD in our profession, because it is sorely needed. We lose more officers every year to the stresses of this job than we do in any kind of felonious action. The strongest of knees will buckle under the weight of the world.
And that can bridge over into a subject nobody wants to talk about, and that is guns. And I never went into that issue wanting to take guns away from people, legal people who have guns in order to protect themselves, to go hunting, whatever it is. But I'll tell you what I found was effective. Not because I was saying it, but because of what we were talking about. Safety for police officers. How do you protect them? Not by having a photo op. You protect them by trying to reduce the possible attack on a police officer and what the attack is all about. You do not protect them by taking a gun away from a hunter. And I think we've crossed that bridge, by the way, President. We've crossed that bridge. I think people begin to understand that. But we shouldn't just throw in the towel and say, well, guns don't kill people, people kill people. These are people's lives who've stood up to protect us. I want in every way for us to examine what are the ways to stop the police officer from putting himself in danger. That's what I want to do.
Well, I mean,
and the other bills, that we talked about last year took some time to get passed.
Right.
But you know what? If you do a one and out, you're never going to get anything done.
You're right.
Not in the Congress of the United States.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's talk about the Equity Act. It's such an injustice to people in this profession. There's a lot of different aspects to it. People working alongside each other, doing the same exact job, taking the same risks, doing the same exact functions, and in some cases, some have one retirement system while the others have something that is definitely just not fair.
Right.
It's not fair. So let's talk about the Equity Act. You've been a big leader of this for a number of years. Disappointed, we got 100 co-sponsors. Suggests that there's some good support for
it's
it.
There.
But we can't seem to get it further.
Well, because we bump into each other all the time, and rather than put aside any differences, you got to look at the bigger picture. The bigger picture is let's get it done. So, for instance, police officers, firefighters, teachers can get Social Security.
Yeah.
So they have a guaranteed piece of the action when they begin to retire. That is the most foolish thing I've ever heard of in my life.
Yeah, we're going to come back to that one. I really do want to talk about windfall elimination, government pension offset, Social Security, some reform of Social Security, but I'd really like to dive into the Equity Act, because we have so many of our members that are affected by this, and it's just, just like Social Security, windfall elimination, government pension offset, there is an inequity here in the system. People are hired to do a job, and depending on how they were classified when they hired, do the same exact job, but find themselves in different retirement systems.
Crazy.
Yeah, something doesn't make sense there. So
no, and I think it really hurts attracting people to the profession.
Well, absolutely. Look at the people we're losing. I mean, we're investing in training people to do these jobs, and they're leaving, going into other professions because it's just because they're looking for some stability in their retirement, like they're the person standing next to them.
Yeah.
I don't know how we reconcile the fact that people doing the same job could have two different benefits.
It's like the people who are applying for a policeman's job, police officer's job.
Yeah.
And they're treated very differently when they're applying in a city where there's more dense population and where it's a different situation altogether. Yeah. But how are you going to attract people?
That's it.
You got to make the job a little more attractive than it is. Equity is at the center of it.
And our whole
system. And if they are hired, then they go to the suburbs a year later.
That's it. Our whole system's built on equity. It's all built on fairness.
Yes.
So, you know, we're in an existential threat right now in law enforcement.
I think
the damage that has been done in the last 2 years has done two things. It's taking people in law enforcement. They're either retiring early because they can, or people are leaving and going in other professions because they see it as more stable.
They are.
And then we're seeing the best and the brightest. We've done so much damage to this profession, they're not applying.
And it's a waste of money that we put into it.
Exactly. And at some point, something's got to give here. Right?
Yes.
You know, our communities are suffering. We look across the country and we can see examples.
Well, I didn't think there was anything more important than equity. And I've been talking about this for 25 years, and we finally got a chance to change things. And I think the legislation is very powerful about what shall be demanded in the job and what you're able to provide for that job and what the job is going to pay in regard to that.
Yeah.
And I think we're getting there, and we've passed the Rubicon, and we are on our way to victory here.
So what do you see coming in the new Congress with the Law Enforcement Equity Act? Do you think?
I think we're torn between making the job more professional, police officer, and at the same time forgetting about why we have police officers. And we can't do that. We can't out-professionalize ourselves so that it doesn't become the attractive job that it is, not realizing that within making it more of a professional job, it could be more of an attraction to people if the pay was consummate, if we had reason to believe that people are going to come and make a career out of this. Then we save money, the public saves money, that we don't have to hire cops because some come in and leave in the back door. We want people to stay.
Yeah. Well, our federal counterparts, our federal officers, the ones that are affected by the Equity Act, they need this relief because it's just, one, it's not fair for them to stand side by side and do the same job. But at the same time, we really do need to stabilize these professions. People are leaving because it's just not work. Look at the amount of money.
Time to do it, though.
Look at the amount of money that's invested in people at these positions that are leaving, going elsewhere to do jobs. It's just not the most efficient model, and it's just not fair. So,
and the great majority, most police officers are the finest human beings you can meet. We have to communicate that more.
Right.
We words are words. You got to show people how many cops are parts of their community.
Yeah.
They don't live
we are
400 miles away from their action. Yeah. But the point is, we assume that people don't assume anything in law enforcement. Yeah. If you do, you're going to be in trouble. But more and more people are listening. More and more congressmen are beginning to understand that instead of getting into the rhetoric of party philosophy about law and order, God help us.
Yeah.
We should be getting into the rhetoric of human beings and their interaction in the community that they live. Because it has a lot to do about law enforcement. It has more to do to help the cop than anything else in the world. Yeah. Because even if you raise the pay in and of itself, it doesn't mean you have a better police department. Yeah. And you know that better than anybody.
Well, we appreciate your efforts on this bill, and we're committed to try and help you. Our federal counterparts definitely need that assistance. You know, I want to shift gears a little bit. I know you're on the Ways and Means Committee.
Yes, sir.
And windfall elimination, government pension offset is something that is so dear to so many of my members. You know, we look at, you know, first it's just a serious inequity in this entire design of somehow law enforcement officers or in this case any public employee who worked in the public sector and did not pay into the Social Security system and has their pension system, of which they were part of the contribution into their pension system, go on to work and get qualified in another profession or another job, eligible for eligible for Social Security. And because of that, there's a provision in the law, for those who are not familiar with it, what it does is it recognizes that you have two different public pension systems.
That's right.
One's Social Security, one would be
your
public pension.
Inequities.
Yeah. Now, we pay for both.
Yeah.
But somehow, because of that, there needs to be a formula applied to it. Now, if I was in private sector and I paid in a 401k, I'm not impacted by that. but somehow public employees are being adversely impacted on the fact that because they were public servants. And there's just a fairness problem there. We've got our members are struggling across this country, trying to decide whether they buy medicine or food because they retired at a pension.
It's come to.
Yeah, that's what it retired at a pension. It may have sound, reasonable at the time, but now you advance forward, they're not even entitled to get their Social Security that every other American gets. How do we fix this?
I started to work on this 15 years ago.
Yeah.
I had a long conversation with Richie Neal, who was the chairman of Ways and Means, is now the ranking member. And Richie and I talked about the public sector and the private sector and the advantages of each and the disadvantages. And we talked very specifically about cops, firefighters, teachers not being able to get into the Social Security system. And we want to do something about it. We talked also to the chairman at one time and the second in command at other times, Kevin Brady of Texas. He's just retired. Kevin was a fair guy. We didn't agree on much politically, but he was a fair chairman. He was understanding, and he tried to work something out. He agreed with us. He said, we got to do something for those firefighters and cops and the teachers, and he meant it. And we, the three of us, would, as the discussion went on over the years, get a little closer to each other about the subject matter. And he was willing to look at legislation, read it, and maybe even vote on it. We didn't get that opportunity, unfortunately, about what we're talking about here, equity and with Social Security. And it was just too bad he retired, and we lost a good friend because he was very helpful with the situation. This is unacceptable, period, that police officers cannot become a part of the system. And they're paying into it. We had come up with a fair system. Richie and I would like to bring the bill up tomorrow, but we want to make sure we have the votes.
Particular bill, I think we're at 170 now, if I'm not mistaken, a co-sponsor. So we're on our way to 290 again. Yeah. And 290 should put us either in front of the House, or it should put us in front of the committee. And I'm just, what do you see if we make it to committee?
I think both approaches can be joined together very easily.
Yeah.
Compromise. We do it. Well, we don't do it much lately. But we need compromise on this issue. It's that important.
Well, compromise is a little rare in D.C. lately, but you're right. We have to find a way to fix this.
Yes.
But at the same time, put yourself in my position. And look, we're both in the same position.
Yes.
We're serving a constituency that's struggling with this, and any fix. If we're going to recognize that there's an inequity here, we need to find a way to fix it for everybody. If we don't fix it for everybody, it's kind of a
that's why our bill.
Yeah,
did try to address that.
Yeah. So, well, good. So my guess is my goal is we're going to have it back in that committee pretty soon, and I'm hoping Ways and Means will give us some path forward to where we can fix this inequity.
Mr. President, I give you my vote right now.
I appreciate that.
And anytime I can be of any help, my door is always open.
Yeah.
My door is always open.
I appreciate that.
And in fact, the first thing I'm doing Friday is going to the promotion of our new police chief in Paterson, New Jersey.
Cool.
I'm trying to get to all of those things when I'm in town.
Great.
And I think this is important. It's significant. It's significant that I am there. Talk is cheap. We're going to do this with cops, and we're going to do that for cops, and we wind up doing very little. So prove yourself. Make it important and significant for themselves and their families. Yeah. There's nothing wrong in that. That doesn't mean you're selfish.
So I know you and Congressman Rutherford, a career law enforcement officer, are part of the law enforcement caucus.
That is correct.
Let's talk about the importance of that caucus and what it's doing and how it benefits us.
Well, I think the caucus is important in tough issues that occurred in how we're going to bring justice to the police department. And there was a big controversy over that. I think there was much misunderstanding. I think it got out of hand. No one was particularly guilty, but we got out of hand. Yeah. And we didn't solve the problem.
That we did not.
And my message to police officers at that time is, look, we're not going to go into a situation and have justice for the police department by putting their homes up for sale, okay? Yeah. We're not going to do that. It's not going to work, first of all. So maybe instead of that, we can, how about this? How about if we make the municipalities responsible? What's the upside? What's the downside to that? I said that this was going to happen, and the police, some of them, took the position that it's this or nothing.
Yeah. Well,
that's where we are.
Well, I can, look, we're at law enforcement is a very difficult task. We're asked to show up.
But how come you guys stood up and did the right thing?
Well,
how you weren't any less pro cop when you did it?
So look, I think anybody in law enforcement, our very powers we have as law enforcement officers are directly related to trust of our community. If we know anything, we know we have some work to do.
Yeah.
And there's a way to get there.
There is.
But they're all, but in many cases, a lot of the things that came out of Congress during that period of time, or at least the discussions in Congress, was void of a law enforcement perspective. That's where we struggled with all of it. It's very difficult. If we, I've sat with, personally spoke with Congresswoman Bass about this very issue. We found things in these bills that we can embrace. We thought were great. But when it came time to talk about the things that we saw that would destabilize what we're doing in the law enforcement profession, we didn't get an opportunity to talk about those. We didn't get a chance to testify before the House.
Right.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. I think there's nothing we can't solve if we all work together to do it.
No question.
But the reality is when you look at a community, it is quality of life in a community.
Right.
It is related to a whole lot of different functions, not just law enforcement.
Absolutely.
But law enforcement seems to be the one that carries the burden on all of these because we are the most visible.
You guys are supposed to solve all the problems.
That's it.
It's like the teacher in school who gets the kids. When they open up the door in the morning, all the problems come through the door.
Absolutely. Don't I know that?
Solve it before you go home.
Yep.
It doesn't work that way.
I worked in schools for a number of years, and I can tell you, whatever happens in a community is that school's problem as soon as the bell rings.
Yes.
Yep, absolutely.
No question about it.
And in a lot of ways, it fixing some of those things before they even go back home, trying to stabilize.
And those who are advocating, which there are only a few, by the way, who are advocating defunding the police departments, I'm busting my chops for 25 years to bring more money to the police departments. So we cannot color with the same paint. What we got to do is call out each person individually.
Yep, absolutely.
And that's the best way to do it.
Law enforcement officers across this country that suit up and show up every single day and make a difference. So when we find, occasional times where something's not right, even law enforcement officers look at it and say, no one hates a bad cop worse than a good cop, and that's the reality of it. But we're no different than any other profession.
It's like teachers who I think turned the corner and questioned what was going on in the school. Teachers have to take a hand in things, but teachers cannot solve all the family problems and personal problems of other people. No doubt. They may try to help the situation, but they can't do that. Yeah, no doubt. And we got to understand that when cops go into work, they need some help too, because the job is a stress job.
We've lost way too much experience, and we
lost too many lives.
It's too damn important to not get it right.
Right.
Period.
I agree.
So how about if we leave it at that? So
hey, I want to thank you for putting up with me for a little while.
Absolutely.
And I want you to know my phone and my door are open to you all the time.
Well, thank you very much. You're a great partner working on these issues.
And I spend a lot of time concerning law enforcement, believe it or not. Yeah. And I like it. I like it.
And we appreciate it.
I don't want to be a cop, but I like what you do.
Yeah, thank you.
And we got to do it right. And we got to do it better. Hey, by the way, as a congressman, we need to do it better, too. Yeah.
We all got skin in the game.
There's a thought.
Yeah, we all got skin in the game. So again, thank you. And to our viewers and listeners who tuned in to the Blue View, where we talk about the issues that are so vitally important to men and women who suit up and show up every day across this country, thank you.
Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you get your podcasts. To get the latest from the National FOP, make sure to follow us on Twitter and Facebook at GLFOP and on Instagram at FOP National. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.